Hello everybody, history is not historically accurate. You heard me right, and I'm going to talk about why I believe that for a moment. This is not going to be a hugely long video, but I see often people saying that they want their games to be historically accurate, and it bugs me for a couple of specific reasons, and we're going to count the ways. I'm here in the wonderful world of mayo and taxes, just so that I have something to gesticulate at. So, what specifically am I saying is wrong? People say that, for example, it's historically inaccurate for the Roman Empire to beat the Ottomans, let's say, for example. And what they mean by that sometimes is, that didn't happen, which of course is true. The Ottomans rose to power and they united the Beyliks as the Sultanate of Rum, and they expanded out and they, claimed their place as, they would say, the successors of Rome. So that did happen, right? Is it therefore historically accurate that that happened? I submit to you no. Because, or rather that must happen. Now we're going to very briefly talk a little bit about theories of time, and then we're going to keep talking about video games. So there are a couple of different theories. One is that the entire fate of the universe, from start to finish, is set. Time is merely what bit of that big chunk of events you're looking at, right? This is sometimes referred to as B theory, if I remember my undergraduate degree well. And that, I think, is the view espoused by those that say for a game to be historically accurate, events that historically took place must take place. The idea is that there is history, and then it all plays out the way it should play out. Now, that is, in a sense, historically accurate, right? That is what happened, so for that to happen is accurate. Sure. However, first off, if you wish for a game to be of that nature, then you better not touch the controls, because there was no player. In history, there was no one with all of this information and ability to interact and all of this stuff. Secondly, of course, there was no one nation causing little differences. There was no butterfly flapping its wings and changing the course of history through their actions. So, that's one way that you could design, and it would not be a game, it would be a history simulator. That's one way you could design it, and in some senses, it would be accurate. But would it? Because is B theory true? Now, I'm not going to dive deep into the philosophy of time and causality and free will and so on, but there are theories, some relatively well-grounded in physics theories, that say that no, if you rewound the clock to 1357 and then you ran it forwards again, not all the same events would happen, because there are events that are actually uncaused. There are events that you cannot effectively predict precisely when they will take place, from radioactive decay to which slit a photon goes through and where it lands on the paper at the other end. There are events that you cannot predict. Strict universal determinism, that events march from A to B to C to D in a complete unbroken chain of causality, is wrong according to our best modern physics, as I understand it, as a non-physicist. So, now that we have established, and let's say that we have, for the purposes of this conversation, that if you rolled back time, it would not play out precisely as it had. I can't tell you precisely why these, quantum events would result in the Emperor of Rome making different decisions. Wow, look at that. It's got some dope-looking armor on. Cool. Making different decisions that resulted in Rome being triumphant and the Ottomans failing. But it is at least plausible that if you rolled back the clock, events would take place differently, I think, even if you changed nothing. Now consider the fact that you can, in fact, change things. So let's say you're playing as Spain, and Spain is the one that has the demographic. By the time the French Revolution would happen, Spain is the one that has the demographics which would put them in the right spot, the demographics and the societal structure and the economic situation and so on, that puts them in the situation to have the French Revolution. I submit to you that it is more historically accurate for Spain to then experience a series of events which were historically, of course, taking place in France, and we can call it whatever, the Spanish Revolution. And we will then get, what's Napoleon in Spanish? I don't know. We would then get some Spanish guy who would go down in history as a lawmaker or a proto-fascist, depending on your perspective. To me, it is specifically historically inaccurate to say that simply because something happened in history, it must have happened. So the revolutions in France, the series of revolutions and wars in the Napoleonic era, they didn't happen because they were inevitable. And that's the crux of my thesis here. They didn't happen because they were inevitable. They happened because of a very specific confluence of circumstances. If those circumstances conspired a little way to the south in Madrid, then it would be more keeping to history for the events to take place in Spain. Because what happened in history was a confluence of circumstances and a result of those circumstances. The location of those confluence of circumstances is, to me, the less interesting part. It's not really about, and I know this is very much just my opinion, but it's not about precisely where these things happen. It's about what happened. And what happened wasn't the French were uniquely ornery. What happened was the French were in a very particular position. And if someone else is in that position, it's more accurate for them to have it. Now, why do I bring any of this up? Of course, we're all looking forward. I hope you are. I certainly am. To Europa Universalis 5. And something that Johann said, and we talked about it a little bit in my previous video on the subject of the Situations dev diary, irked me. He said that players want to see a strong Ottoman Empire, they want to see a strong Russia, they want to see the Reformation, and they want to see the wars of religion. 2 out of 3 points, Johann. In my opinion, 2 out of 4. 2 out of 4 points. Reformation and wars of religion, I agree. But I certainly don't want to see a Bohemian War followed by a Spanish War, followed by a French War, or whatever it was. I forget the sequences of the 30 Years' War. I want to see a war organically emerge in an interesting way, similar to history, but different depending on the current situations. I've got to know, why is Lancashire independent? They are an appendage. Interesting. I want it to emerge dynamically. So, historically, Bohemia, subject under Austria, lots of kind of chafing against the Austrian yoke, and a very wealthy, educated, kind of bourgeoisie and city and noble class in Prague. Perfect situation for religious disagreement, which has the, we've come to these enlightened positions, which completely by coincidence puts us at odds with our hated rivals over in Ostermark and Wien. So that was the situation. Now imagine it was the other way around. Imagine that, what's his name? The guy in the intro of Kingdom Come Deliverance didn't cause lots of problems, and Bohemia was now the subject master over Austria, and Wien had a big, wealthy, well-educated class of people who were reading and going like, this Catholic Church stuff, this seems bad, and completely coincidentally, it puts us at odds with our masters over in Prague. Now, you might well have an Austrian start to the wars of religion, and me personally, and this is me personally, I would very much like to be able to see the wars of religion play out very differently based on circumstances like that. And in Mayo and Taxes, you can have that. I don't know if you're aware, but it's a great freaking mod. You should go and try it out. Maybe you should wait till the UI update drops, which is coming up in the kind of relative near future, which will be cool. In that game, if you are a overlord over a subject or you conquer a bunch of foreign lands, if you're Catholic, they're more likely to go Protestant. And things like that can genuinely organically emerge. And even EU4 already allows for this. So that can organically emerge. And yes, EU4 already has it because, for example, people will join sides of the League War based on what side they want to join. So people want to see that. So, yes, Wars of Religion Reformation. People want to see those historical events because they're interesting. But They want them to organically emerge, and they want them to be some limitations, but not total limitations. Now let's take a look at the other two, Russia and the Ottomans, and let's focus on the Ottomans. The thesis is players want to see a strong Ottomans. Now, is that true? I don't think it is. I think players want a strong rival. That's for sure. So if you're playing as Spain, I want there to be a strong, let's call them Bosphorian power, to coin a phrase. I want there to be a strong Bosphorian power, but I don't need it to be the Ottomans. Not by a long shot. I want the game to be set up such that, the historical setup is as it is, but then I want it to simulate. And if that powerful Bosphorian power was a resurgent Roman Empire some of the time, that's fantastic. If it were a resurgent Serbian Empire some of the time, that's fantastic. If it were a Bulgarian Empire, fantastic. That's interesting. That's fun. That's dynamic. Now, there is a problem though. I probably don't want it to be these guys. Germaniarids. Germanianids. Probably saying that wrong. I apologize. Now, why is that? Is it because I just don't like their color on the map? Okay, partly. But I also don't want it to be these guys. They have a cool color on the map. I think it'd be more interesting if it was Karamids. They have a cool color. They're interesting as well. But anyway, or the Mamluks. The Mamluks would be cool. Why not? Because I haven't heard of these. I know a bit about Bulgaria. I know a bit about Serbia. I know a bit about the Romans. I know a bit about the Ottomans. I know a bit about the Mamluks. This kind of thing. These are nations that I have heard of and have, while I'm fighting them as Spain, I'm thinking like, oh, that's interesting. Isn't it interesting how this has diverged from the historical path that blah nation took? That's fun and interesting. The problem is if you haven't heard of them. And of course you can learn about them, which is interesting. And I would be curious to know more about these people. And if they were always the strong power, I probably would learn more about them. And I think Johan has come to this conclusion about players need a strong Ottomans because of the failure of Imperator Rome. This is my theory. And I'm not saying this is definitely true. It's just a theory. And the reason is that in Imperator Rome, which I'm not going to boot up because I think I've uninstalled it. It's an okay game. You should try it out. It's not terrible, but it's not great. There are like 6 countries that people actually know about. There's Rome, there's Carthage, there's Macedonia, there's Sparta, there's Athens. Is there Athens? It might not be Athens. I think that might be controlled by Macedonia. I can't remember. There's Ptolemaic Egypt. There's the big one here, just called the S something. And that's about it. Right? Those are the ones you've heard of. So the problem is, if anyone except them wins and becomes big and powerful, when you're going up against them, you don't know how to pronounce their name in the YouTube video. I mean, you don't have any interesting historical things to tie to thinking about that nation. Like when I'm thinking about Fez and Morocco and fighting them, it's interesting because there's backstory. I know the lore, basically. And if a country diverges from its law, such as Bulgaria taking over this whole region, that's fine, because I know something about Bulgaria. If it's Vidin, that's not good. So, what's my claim here? Basically, I don't think it's true that the player always wants to see a strong Ottomans. If you've been on the EU4 subreddit much, they're always complaining. Period. But also, they're always complaining about the fact that it's always a strong Ottomans, and that's boring. And it's true, it's boring. I don't want to play the same game over and over again. Johan claims that the player wants their actions to influence history, as opposed to other actors' actions. That's true to an extent, but let's say we're playing EU5, and I have chosen to play as Rius here. And if I'm playing as Rius, I'm not going to affect the Bosphorus conflict very much, which means if the only person changing history is me, it's going to play out the same every single time, which means by the time I've finished uniting the North German Confederation or whatever, it's going to be the Ottomans every time, which is boring. It's boring. So, in summary, history is not historically accurate. Things did not have to happen as they were. I have been wrong about this in the past, but as it turns out, in fact, if you rewound the clock and played the world forwards again, it seems likely that events would in fact transpire differently. The quantum world has effects that reach all the way up into the big world, and those things are not caused, which means that events are not predetermined. It doesn't mean you have free will, but that's a separate conversation. So, the events that took place historically in France could have taken place in Castile in a different turn of events, and the events took place because of the circumstances. The events should not simply result in the circumstances arising, they should result from the circumstances arising. Secondly, players need to fight enemies that they have heard of and that they are interested in and that they know the deep lore. So that doesn't mean that it always needs to be the Ottomans. That means it needs to be someone that people are kind of vaguely familiar with. So yes, tiny powers shouldn't suddenly take over big ones, but any of the local big ones is good enough. There was going to be a third point, but I can't remember what it was. So third point, I don't know, be good to one another or something. Anyway, that's the video, more or less. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Tell me if you disagree. Tell me if you are a staunch B-theory time believer, even in the face of quantum theory. I would be interested to hear your claims. And I'll see you in the next one.